As the Denver Broncos approach the 2022 NFL season, I think it's fair that we take a look at what the expectations are for general manager George Paton in his full-time second season as the team's general manager. What does this entail, and why does it also include Super Bowl aspirations, beating the Kansas City Chiefs, and much more? You get all that in today's jam-packed episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked on Network and 9 News. Broncos Country, thank you so much for making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day. Every single day when you wake up in the morning, you have your cup of coffee, you go to work, you go to the gym, you're making breakfast. We appreciate those of you who tune in free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format. Also, those who watch us here on YouTube, thank you so much for all your support and interaction. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Sayre, great to be back with you here for another episode of the show. Great to chat here with Broncos Country. And Sayre, we're talking about expectations. Yes, the 2022 season is a little bit of ways away, but for general manager George Paton, expectations are always something that I think a lot of people focus on, and we're going to keep it realistic on today's episode of the show.
And I don't think George Paton would have it any other way than I think what a lot of Broncos Country has the expectations at, Cody, for every different individual thing that we could look at. I mean, the expectations, they are high. They're very, very high. So you make a big move like going out and getting Russell Wilson, that resets the bar. It just completely resets everybody's expectations. You got fans out here selling out jerseys, which I don't know. I don't remember the last time that's ever happened, Cody. For in my lifetime as a Broncos fan, I can't think of a time when a player's jersey actually sold out. So, man, it's high expectations in Broncos Country. And I think George Paton, honestly, I think he loves it.
No, it's a great thing to have because, you know, when you have a player who's got one of the top-selling jerseys in the NFL, I still haven't gotten the 2 Color Rush jerseys that I ordered, one of which we're going to give away to one lucky listener here of the Locked on Broncos podcast. They say May 2nd is the estimated delivery date, so I still have about a month away before that happens there. But, I mean, it's a great feeling to have here for the Broncos because the hype is now real. And now with that hype comes high expectations, as you mentioned. With those expectations must produce some tangible results here on the field. So as you talked about the first expectation with the big ticket offseason pickups, they have to make sure that they hit. Now, you touched on Russell Wilson. Those kind of expectations are always high. The Broncos now have a quarterback. Can that translate into wins? And obviously maybe a playoff for Super Bowl aspirations. I know those are things we'll talk about here. But let's talk about one of the other key offseason acquisitions. The NFL draft is still a couple weeks away here. So for the Broncos, they must focus here on Randy Gregory. For George Paton, this was, as we talked about, a high-risk, high-reward type move here for this Broncos organization. And Randy Gregory must be a player that George Paton, who has went out in free agency and has banked on, has given money to. He must come out and he must have a really good year here for Denver. The expectations are very high, especially at pass rusher. We were talking about quarterback expectations in Denver, Sayre. Now edge rusher expectations are massively high considering what we've been, fortunate enough to see with the guys like Elvis Dumervil, Von Miller, and DeMarcus Ware in the year that they had there. Now Randy Gregory must come out and be that proven guy here for the Broncos.
Yeah, it's been a good decade of pass rush productivity, hasn't it, Cody? I mean, dating back to the 2012 season when the Denver Broncos had Von Miller and Elvis Dumervil playing really at their best together. And then you had the whole fax machine snafu right after that, and then DeMarcus Ware coming in 2014. So it's been a really good period of time if you like to watch good pass rushers. Von Miller obviously been in Denver since 2011 up until last season, but now it's Randy Gregory's time to take on the torch, and he's going to be out there rocking the number 5, which I think is really cool, Cody. And I know jersey numbers mean a lot to a lot of people, so that's something that I am on that wavelength. So But Randy Gregory as the big ticket free agent, we talk about expectations for George Paton, and I think a lot of people, they would say, well, the offseason, like me, and I think you as well, the offseason overall is an A+. You got Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
That's great. But at the other positions of need, you did pass on Von Miller and Chandler Jones to go out and get Randy Gregory. So now, what are the expectations for Randy Gregory? Well, what's every Broncos fan going to do every single week, Cody? They're going to look at the box score from the Buffalo Bills, and they're going to look at the box score for the Las Vegas Raiders, and they're going to see how many sacks, how many tackles for loss, how many quarterback hits did Von Miller and Chandler Jones have compared to Randy Gregory. I think that George Paton is not necessarily his reputation is on the line, but I think a lot is on the line with this Randy Gregory move.
Well, another move that they did make too, bringing in DJ Jones. And unfortunately, one of the casualties of the Russell Wilson trade was the Broncos sending away Shelby Harris, who, look, has instantly become a little bit of a fan favorite over there. If you're a Seahawks fan, you're listening to this, you will love Shelby Harris. He is unfiltered. He's fun. And look, you're going to get a lot of laughs. You're going to get a lot of big moments out of him. We obviously wish Shelby the best here. But now DJ Jones has to come in and essentially kind of be that replacement. Now, it's really unclear as to where he will truly play. Is he going to play the 3 technique? Is he going to play the 1 or the 0? Are they going to maybe put him more so in the A gap primarily because he's such a force there? That is a huge question here, especially with the Broncos bringing back Deshaun Williams. You still have Draymond Jones, a big contract year for Draymond, which is approaching him here. But even like DJ Jones, it has to be a good pick. And I think if the Broncos, Sayre, I think the expectation is met here. If DJ Jones helps the Broncos become a top 10, top 15 defense against the run, which last year they simply weren't.
They weren't, and that's a really crucial piece, you're right, of this team going forward. You can be a top 5 scoring defense, as we saw last season for the Broncos for most of the year. I mean, they were one of the best teams at not allowing points, just flat out. But man, the over the course of the season, as you struggle to defend against the run, that really wore the Broncos defense down over time. And we saw it kind of culminate at near the end of the season against the Raiders and other teams. Just really the Broncos struggled to defend the run, and injuries at linebacker did play into that. But at the same time, I feel like inconsistency on the interior defensive line. So that's a big reason why they went out and got DJ Jones. And now you trade away Shelby Harris to go ahead and get Russell Wilson, or at least part of what you gave up to get Russell Wilson. Now DJ Jones has to come in and pair up with Draymond Jones to give the Broncos a really formidable interior defensive line duo. Maybe we see some guys slide down into a defensive end position. So like you said, DJ Jones can do what he does best over the A gap.
Well, we'll see what the Broncos do in the NFL draft. They even add more depth on the defensive line to stop the run. But in terms of the first expectation about the big ticket offseason moves by George Paton, making and hitting right away, that's going to be something we will be focusing on here this upcoming season. But one of the other expectations that we are going to have relates to the AFC West. And there's a certain team in the AFC West that has been king of the hill for quite some time. Why is this an important expectation for the Broncos and George Paton specifically to overcome here in 2022? You get that and much more coming up here in just a moment. But first, let me tell you about the sponsor. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos. That's our good friends over there at Shady Rays. And Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' Insane Protection Program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every pair, and they will send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. Give them a try, and if you don't love them, you'll pay nothing. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays. Exclusively for our listeners of Locked On Broncos, we want you to head over to shadyrays.com and use promo code Locked On. That's one word, Locked On, to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code Locked On for their best deal of the entire season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. Sayre, as we jump into the second half action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, once again, Broncos Country, mile high salute to you. Let's ride. Thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we are here for you every single weekday all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an off season. We're talking about expectations here, Sayre. We talked about the first one being about the Broncos' big-time moves here this offseason. They have to hit and have to be impact players right away here in 2022. The second expectation is more of a tangible one that we need to see evident results here. Do the Broncos have a roster that's good enough to beat the Kansas City Chiefs? And Sayre, I think we can make the argument in the past 2 seasons, Denver has had the talent. They've had the potential to beat Kansas City in the past 2 seasons, but the number one thing that held them back was the offensive side of the ball. It was quarterback play. It was turnovers on the offensive side of the ball. Really, offensive ineptitude was really the hindrance for this Broncos football team against Kansas City in the prime 2 years where they had a window to compete. Denver right now, I feel like, has a very strong defense to be able to do that, to be able to compete against Kansas City. Obviously, trading away Tyreek Hill from the division is huge news for the Broncos, even though they added MVS and they added Juju Smith-Schuster alongside McCole Hardman and Travis Kelce. They'll have more guys they can spread the production out to, but I like the Broncos' chances defensively, especially considering Denver has given them fits. How much of that changes, though, with Ejiro Evero's defensive philosophy as a first-time DC in comparison to Vic Fangio, who really knew how to get after Kansas City, how to get after Patrick Mahomes? That, to me, I think is the biggest dilemma here. But, Sayre, look, the Broncos, they have not beaten the Chiefs since 2015, since that Week 2 scoop and score by Bradley Roby. It's been that long, and I tell you what, in 2022, that's got to come to an end.
It really does. I mean, there's no question about it. The Broncos have to find a way to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. And like you said, who knows how different it's going to be with Ejiro Evero running his defensive scheme as compared to Vic Fangio. I feel like the Broncos got really close back in 2018 when Vance Joseph was still the head coach. Case Keenum, that pass to Demaryius Thomas that went just over his head. I mean, that was probably the closest the Broncos got to beating the Chiefs in these last 7 years. And since then, you've had a couple of games that have been just, man, if this, play would have happened, or if this player would have caught this pass, or if this thing would have happened, it's just these one or two things that you point to over the course of the game that really killed the Broncos. And like you said, ultimately it comes down to offensive ineptitude. And I agree with you, Cody. I feel like the Broncos do have the defense to be able to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. What's great now is I think they also have the offense to be able to beat the Kansas City Chiefs if, in fact, the defense has an off day. Let's say the defense can't just shut down Patrick Mahomes with their coverage schemes, or the pass rush just isn't getting home, and the Chiefs are able to score 38, 42 points, whatever it is. I feel like, I feel pretty confident in saying that the Broncos now have an offense that can score 43 points if the Chiefs score 42, or 39 if they score 38. I feel like they finally have the weaponry, the firepower, and the signal caller under center to be able to get that done.
And I know why we talk about this being an expectation for George Paton. Look, George Paton knows this as well. And he's been asked a couple of times here this offseason in media scrums at the NFL League Owners Meeting, how do you think the Broncos standing kind of sits right now inside the AFC West? And he said, hey, look, we can talk about maybe where we feel like we are, but he's like, we have to do it. We have to go out and we have to win these divisional games. We have to beat the Chiefs. We have to beat the Chargers. We have to beat the Raiders. And the Broncos have been very inconsistent inside divisional play here. Like I said, they've split games with the Chargers. They've been swept by the Raiders. Like those are things that are very unheard of. And when we talk about Broncos country, and even George Paton reflect on it, he said, I'm a 7-10 GM right now. I have a lot of work to do. And he says, I'm trying to do whatever I can to put this team in a position to overcome that. So I think that for George Paton, it's easy to get bought into the hype of the roster and all the moves that they've made here. You make a great point here. George Paton's roster needs to be good enough not to just compete, but to actually beat Kansas City. And I think some of the things that he has done, I think the moves that he has made, and one of them more recently being Jonas Griffith signing his tender, he is officially back in 2022. I think that the Broncos do have the best chance now and the best roster to be able to beat Kansas City. And look, here's the thing. We talk about the NFL's mantra. It's really been keeping up with the Mahomeses, because really Patrick Mahomes has come in and has set ablaze the National Football League. And then you have the rise of Justin Herbert, to where everyone's like, hey, the Broncos need this to get going. And I think right now the Chiefs have been the standard in the NFL for the last 4 or 5 years in terms of what teams want to be when we talk about playmaking quarterback offense and getting to AFC championship games. I mean, they've been to that game ridiculous amount of times here. And unfortunately for them, look, they've only been able to come away with one Super Bowl win out of all that and a Super Bowl loss. So obviously more Super Bowl appearances in the last couple of years than the Broncos have been in the last 5 or 6 here. So I think Denver would take that, but that's the standard now. And I think that's where the Broncos have to be. And those are high expectations. And with that, I think comes, when you do it, when you achieve it, extreme excitement in Broncos country. When you fail to do it, extreme disappointment. And we talk about the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. I feel like if the Broncos do beat the Chiefs in one of these games this year, it's almost going to feel like the Super Bowl. I want Broncos country to remember that shouldn't be the Broncos Super Bowl because Denver's been there before. You want to remember, you want to act like you've been there before, and Denver has simply done that. So while the idea of beating the Chiefs is important, I think Denver has everything in line now to make it happen. George Paton has gotten a roster there, and I expect that to continue in the NFL draft. And now the team must go out there, and this coaching staff must lead these guys out here, and they must perform on Sundays or Thursday Night Football or Monday Night Football. Whenever the Broncos decide to play AFC West divisional opponents, they have to take care of business. But, Sayre, what is the third expectation here for George Paton, and why does it involve hoisting up a potential Lombardi trophy in his tenure as GM? We talk about the reasons why coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about our good friends over there at Built Bar. And Broncos Country, as you know it, Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today. It's my favorite protein bar. It's Sayre's favorite protein bar. And we love the 9 amazing original flavors that they have, plus the occasional limited time flavor. My personal original favorite flavor is the peanut butter brownie. I like the double chocolate. I love the salted caramel. I also love the puff flavors, which is marshmallow fluff covered in 100% milk chocolate. But here's the catch, though. A protein bar that's covered in 100% milk chocolate that contains 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. That sounds like a dang good deal here for me here, Locked On Broncos. So Broncos Country, we want you to go to Built.com here today. And when you go to checkout, after finding a flavor in a box that best suits you and your taste buds, make sure you enter promo code LOCK15, and that'll get you 15% off your next order at Built.com. What is the third expectation here for Denver Broncos general manager George Paton as we enter the 2022 NFL season, as we enter the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos? Once again, Broncos Country, thank you so much for all the support that you've listed here for this podcast, for the show, for Sayre, Bedinger, myself. We love to bring you daily Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage, and you can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast. You can get us here on YouTube, so make sure you're subscribed and you got notifications turned on so you never miss out on all the Broncos coverage that you need all year long here. But Sayre, kind of going on through our portion here, talking about expectations, Super Bowl contention, like, it's one of those things we've talked about too. And I think even going back to last year, one thing that we said, I know, and maybe it's we're too close to the team, but also I've heard a lot of national media people say too, the Broncos are a quarterback away from being Super Bowl contenders. Well, hey, they go out and they get Russell Wilson. I mean, that is big in and of itself, where it pushes the Broncos into that conversation as to they can contend. I would immediately say they're Super Bowl contenders right now. I'd say with the roster on paper, they're in the conversation to contend. We have to see, and obviously, whether or not they are contenders.
I think that's fair, absolutely, and I'm in agreement with what you just said. I've been saying this on this show, and I've been tweeting it, and I've been writing it, and I've been saying it in everywhere that I can say it, anywhere that will listen to me talk about it. I've said I feel like the Broncos are a quarterback away at this point. I've been saying that since probably 2020, and I think even Colin Cowherd at the time thought that, well, Drew Lock, if he could be that guy, this team is pretty talented. And then 2021 rolls around, and it's like, well, man, if Teddy Bridgewater can play the way he did those first 3 games, like, we've talked ourselves into these previous quarterbacks, but now you have a legitimate MVP candidate in Russell Wilson at the quarterback position. And to me, I'm going to put my money where my mouth has been over the last couple years. And I'm going to say, I think if I'm George Paton, my expectation now is Super Bowl contention, right? I think that some people would say, well, playoffs are the expectation at this point. You got a great quarterback, so you should definitely get to the playoffs. But for me, I'm saying it's Final Four or bust this year for the Broncos. I mean, you have to get into the championship game at the very least with the moves that you've made now. I mean, that's kind of where things are at. I think when the Los Angeles Rams last offseason, they acquire Matthew Stafford, I think their expectation level was to get to and win the Super Bowl. Their expectations went through the roof because they made that one move. And obviously they had a really gifted roster aside from just Matthew Stafford. They had a roster that was ready and maybe even probably more proven than what the Broncos are going into 2022. But at the same time, I do feel like, Cody, the Broncos have all the pieces in place to really be a Super Bowl contender with Russell Wilson, and I don't think their expectations should be anything less than that. I know that's from the outside perspective. I think it's fair to say all right, let's pump the brakes a little bit and say, like, okay, they should be a playoff team, or they should be contending for first place in the AFC West this year, but Super Bowl contention is a lofty expectation. That's just kind of where I'm at after the Russell Wilson move, after what I've said for the last however long.
When you want to put it into the magnification scope, I don't even know if that's a real term there. The magnifying glass. That's probably the right proper term there, Sayre. You want to put the Broncos in the magnifying glass here. You really have to compare it to the rest of the AFC West. I mean, the Buffalo Bills have loaded up, especially on defense now with the acquisition of Von Miller. They have Gabriel Davis. They have Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen, a prolific quarterback there. You look at the Bengals, who have really solidified their offensive line. And ironically enough, man, Denver, they should have beat the Cincinnati Bengals last year. Unfortunately, one busted play and unfortunately just some poor turnovers late for the offense really kind of cemented Denver's fate there. That was a huge game for them in terms of maybe getting to the playoffs. It was a playoff game for them, essentially. You look at the Los Angeles Chargers in the division, who've gone out and made some big-time moves on the defensive side of the ball, and they're expected to make an aggressive splash in the NFL draft in round one with more potential talent, while Justin Herbert's still on a rookie deal. The Raiders are there as well, making moves to get Devontae Adams and having a loaded wide receiver core. And the Chiefs, they're still the Chiefs there. I'm intrigued to see what they do to maybe fix up some of the spots on their defense, edge rusher, cornerback additions, another safety, maybe alongside Juan Thornhill, Justin Reed. I don't know if that's going to necessarily push the needle, maybe even another linebacker for them, but it's so top heavy. The Baltimore Ravens getting a lot of guys back from injury. Who knows what's going to happen with the Cleveland Browns? What are the Pittsburgh Steelers going to look like? I mean, for example, the Broncos, they play a fourth place schedule in 2022. One of those teams, guess who was fourth place in the AFC North? The Baltimore Ravens. And they're going to be fully healthy for the most part. And that right there, look, it's going to be a challenge for Denver. But like I said, I think having a quarterback and having a leader like Russell Wilson, it can magnify things. I'm intrigued to see what George Paton continues to do. But another note here is Paton must find ways to add the kind of depth that can cement this roster as a contender. So if any guys go down, any key guys go down, I imagine George Paton will be aggressive and saying, hey, you know what? We need to go out and we need to see what's available out there, and we need to make moves. Guess what he's already had a proven track record of doing? Doing that very thing right there, especially at linebacker. I trust George Paton 110% with some of these lofty expectations that we have. And I think that even for us, like, we have reasonable expectations. I would make the argument maybe Broncos Country has higher expectations, which, fans have that right. Like, that's a realistic thing. When we talk about Broncos fans, the standard in Broncos Country is very high. And how might everything be impacted by a potential new owner for the 2022 NFL season? These are all questions that we're waiting answers for here. But one thing we can guarantee is that you can come here every single day, the Locked On Broncos podcast, for daily Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage, where we flip every side of the coin. We talk about the good and the bad without really having this hot take narrative type stuff, no clickbait bologna sandwich stuff that you get here from other shows. We want to keep it 110% real, and we want your feedback too. We want to interact with you, every member in Broncos Country. And real quick, I want to touch on a couple of the Apple Podcast reviews that we've gotten so far here, Sayre. A lot of 5-star love here. A. Caballero says, unconditionally, the Best Broncos podcast, gave us a 5-star rating. And he said, Cody and Sayre are the hosts of the Best Broncos podcast. They focus on the details that matter and will never insult fans or players like other podcasts. They're professionals first and fans second, which I really appreciate. Hope you hit 30 billion subs. Appreciate so much for the love and the kind words there. Broncos Daily News from KDE213. Best place to find the news on the team that we love. Cody and Sayre make a great team. It's Broncos Country. We couldn't do any of this without you, the avid listeners in Broncos Country. Your voice matters. Your opinion matters to both Sayre and I. We appreciate all the love that we get. Sayre appreciates all the love he gets for his hats that he consistently wears here in the show. And we can't wait to continue to talk more Broncos football with you as well. We will be continuing this expectation series all throughout the offseason as we take a look at key players for this Broncos organization, and we talk about the expectations for them. Not to mention, once the Broncos make their draft selections in the 2022 NFL Draft, you'll also look forward to getting player prospect profile series of the Broncos selections. You get all that and all the daily Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage here in one place, the Locked On Broncos podcast. With that said, Broncos Country, mile high salute to you. We appreciate you so much. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we'll be back tomorrow for another episode of the show. And just for a closing part, let's ride.